The rain beat violently against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Julian Vance's penthouse, but the storm inside his mind was far worse. The clock was ticking. In exactly 1 week, he would turn 30. If he was not legally married by then, his grandfather's bizarre will dictated that the controlling shares of Vance Global would be placed in a trust, vulnerable to a hostile takeover by his ruthless rival, Marcus Sterling. Julian was a man who commanded boardrooms with a single glance, yet here he was, cornered by a piece of paper. He needed a wife, not a partner, not a lover, but a signature on a binding contract. Leaving his office in a sour mood, Julian drove to a quiet, forgotten diner on the edge of the city to meet his discreet lawyer. The diner smelled of old grease and burnt coffee. As he sat down, a waitress with tired eyes but a strangely elegant posture approached. Her name tag read Clara. When a clumsy customer bumped into her, she lost her balance, sending a tray of ice water crashing directly onto Julian's custom Italian leather shoes. Silence fell over the diner. Julian stood up, his jaw clenched, ready to unleash his famous temper. But Clara did not cower. She grabbed a towel, looked him dead in the eye, and told him that standing in the middle of a narrow aisle was a hazard, and that his shoes were entirely impractical for a diner anyway. Julian was stunned. Women usually tripped over themselves to please him. This waitress, however, had a spine of steel. An insane idea formed in his mind. He waited until her shift ended, cornered her in the rainy parking lot, and offered her $2 million to marry him for 1 year. Clara laughed in his face at first, but beneath her worn uniform she was carrying a heavy secret. She desperately needed capital. She accepted on the condition that there would be no media circus and absolutely no physical intimacy. 3 days later, they stood in a cold, echoing courthouse. A judge pronounced them husband and wife in less than 5 minutes. Clara moved into Julian's expansive, silent penthouse. The rules were clear, but the reality was much harder. Julian bought her a wardrobe of designer clothes, expecting her to play the part of a grateful trophy wife. Clara left the boxes unopened, choosing instead to wear her own simple dresses. At their first public appearance, a charity gala, she refused to wear his family diamonds, asserting that she was his contracted wife, not his property. Marcus Sterling was at the gala, circling them like a vulture. He complimented Clara with an oily smile, probing for weaknesses in Julian's sudden marriage. Clara handled Marcus with such icy precision and flawless corporate etiquette that Julian found himself staring at her. Who was this waitress? As weeks turned into months, the cold edges of their arrangement began to blur. They bickered constantly. He hated her stubborn independence. She despised his need for absolute control. Yet, late at night, the penthouse felt less lonely. One evening, Clara fell severely ill with a fever. Julian, a man who had never cared for anyone but himself, stayed awake all night, placing cool, damp cloths on her forehead and forcing her to drink water. In her feverish state, Clara mumbled a name: Thorn Maritime. The next morning, Julian made a few phone calls. When Clara finally walked into the kitchen, pale but recovering, Julian confronted her. He had discovered the truth. She was not a simple waitress. She was Clara Thorn, the sole vanished heiress to Thorn Maritime, a legacy shipping company that had been brutally dismantled and bankrupted 5 years ago. Clara froze. Then the dam broke. She told him the agonizing truth. Her family had been destroyed by a hostile takeover orchestrated by Marcus Sterling, the very man Julian was fighting. She had gone into hiding, working menial jobs while secretly gathering evidence of Marcus's fraudulent practices, waiting for the day she could afford a legal team to expose him. Julian felt a sharp sting of betrayal. She had not married him out of desperation. She had married him to get close to Marcus's inner circle. The silence that followed lasted for weeks. Julian grew distant and cold, throwing himself into his work, using silence as his weapon. Clara retreated to her room, but the absence of her sharp wit and warm presence in the mornings began to hollow him out. He found himself leaving his favorite meetings early, just to catch a glimpse of her reading in the living room. He started leaving small cups of her favorite dark roast coffee on the counter, without a word. He realized he did not care why she had married him. He only cared that she was there. Before Julian could bridge the gap between them, Marcus Sterling struck. Marcus had hired a private investigator and discovered the marriage contract. He ambushed Julian at the Vance Global Shareholder Summit, threatening to leak the contract to the press, voiding Julian's inheritance, and simultaneously threatening to expose Clara to the predatory creditors still chasing her father's debts. He demanded Julian step down immediately, but Marcus had underestimated them. Julian looked at Clara, who was standing in the back of the conference room. She gave him a subtle, determined nod. Julian did not step down. Instead, he signaled his assistant, who projected a massive dossier onto the main screen behind the podium. It was the evidence Clara had spent 5 years agonizingly putting together, combined with Julian's limitless resources. The documents proved unequivocally that Marcus had used offshore accounts and illegal wire fraud to bankrupt Thorn Maritime, and was actively attempting the same scheme against Vance Global. The boardroom erupted. Investors began shouting. Marcus's smug smile vanished, replaced by sheer panic. He tried to defend himself, but the evidence was undeniable. Security escorted a shouting, humiliated Marcus out of the building, his reputation and empire crumbling in real time. The threat was eliminated. That evening, the penthouse was quiet again, but the heavy tension was gone. Julian found Clara by the window, looking out over the city lights. He walked up behind her and did not offer her a new contract or a grand gesture. He simply took her hand. He apologized for his pride, for his blindness, and confessed that the only thing he wanted to inherit for the rest of his life was her heart. Clara turned to him, tears welling in her eyes, and finally let down the heavy walls she had carried for so long. She admitted she had fallen for the arrogant billionaire who made terrible coffee, but stayed up all night to watch over her. The months rolled into a year and the fake contract expired, but neither of them noticed. They were too busy building a new future. Together they merged the stabilized Vance Global with the newly resurrected Thorn Maritime, creating a powerhouse built on integrity rather than greed. They stood side by side, partners in every sense of the word. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good story of love and redemption. Subscribe to the channel to follow the next stories. We will see you next time. Adrian Vale sat at the head of the obsidian conference table, his cold eyes scanning the room. The board members shifted uncomfortably. The merger with the conservative Hashimoto Group was slipping through his fingers. The investors had made it clear that they only did business with family men, not notorious playboys. Adrian had 48 hours to present a respectable wife, or the deal of a lifetime would vanish. He was a man who moved markets with a phone call, but his entire legacy was now hanging on traditional family values he had never cared about. Late that night, long after the executives had fled, Adrian paced his expansive office in the Vale Capitol building. In a moment of frustration, he knocked over a massive stack of files. Sienna Hayes, the night shift cleaner, entered with her cart. Instead of apologizing profusely and cowering like everyone else did around him, she calmly parked her cart, picked up the scattered papers, reorganized them by date, and handed them back. She looked at him with quiet dignity and told him that a tantrum would not solve his corporate crisis and that she had floors to mop. Adrian stared at her. She was sharp, unapologetic, and completely unfazed by his billions. Right there, amidst the scent of lemon polish, he offered her a contract. 1 year of marriage in exchange for financial security. The wedding was a quiet, sterile affair at the city registry. Sienna wore a simple dress she had bought herself, refusing the designer gowns Adrian had sent to her tiny apartment. His mother, Eleanor Vale, stood in the corner of the room with a look of pure disgust, her pearls looking like a tightened noose around her neck. She despised this commoner who had infiltrated their dynasty. Moving into the Vale estate, Sienna set clear boundaries. She kept her own routine, maintained her fierce independence, and absolutely refused to use his black credit card for her own pleasure. The forced proximity began to chip away at their armor. During a tense dinner with the Hashimoto executives, Eleanor tried to subtly humiliate Sienna by asking complex questions about international art and history, hoping to expose her lack of education. To Adrian's surprise, Sienna answered flawlessly. having spent years reading in public libraries during her breaks. Adrian found himself watching her, captivated by her hidden depths. The ice between them began to melt. They started sharing quiet evenings on the terrace, trading stories under the stars, finding a strange comfort in each other's presence. Then the fragile peace shattered. Adrian returned home early one afternoon to find Sienna rushing out of the estate, looking terrified. He followed her car to a pediatric hospital across the city. There, looking through the glass of a recovery room, he discovered her secret. A young deaf boy named Leo, her son from a previous relationship. Sienna had taken the marriage contract solely to pay for his specialized surgeries and expensive education. The revelation felt like a physical blow to Adrian. His pride was deeply wounded. He thought they were building real trust, but she had hidden the most important part of her life from him. He retreated into his cold corporate shell, barely speaking to her for weeks. The silence in the penthouse was deafening. Yet, he could not turn off his growing feelings for her. Without saying a word to Sienna, he quietly paid off all the hospital bills in full and arranged for the best pediatric specialists in the country to take over Leo's case. Eleanor Vale saw an opportunity in the growing distance between them. She hired private investigators and found out about Leo. Cornering Sienna in the estate gardens while Adrian was away, Eleanor delivered a vicious ultimatum. She threatened to use the Vale family lawyers to deem Sienna an unfit mother and take the child away unless Sienna filed for a messy divorce and publicly ruined Adrian's reputation, sabotaging the merger once and for all. Sienna was terrified, caught between her son's safety and the man she was secretly falling for. But Sienna refused to run. She went straight to Adrian and told him everything. The confrontation happened the very next evening at the annual Vale Family Trust gathering. Adrian stood before the entire family board and cornered his mother. He presented audio recordings Sienna had managed to capture on her phone during the blackmail attempt in the gardens. Under the intense pressure and the disgusted stares of the family elders, Eleanor cracked. She screamed that she was only protecting their legacy from a gold digger, tears of rage ruining her makeup. The board was appalled. They voted immediately to strip Eleanor of her voting rights and removed her from the family trust, completely discarding her from the empire she cherished so much. With the threat finally gone, Adrian returned to their bedroom to find Sienna packing her bags, assuming the contract was now broken and over. He gently took the suitcase from her hands. Looking her in the eyes, he apologized for letting his pride blind him and for making her feel she had to face the world alone. He told her that he did not just want a presentable wife for a boardroom, he wanted a family. He wanted her and he wanted Leo. It was a raw, honest confession, stripping away all his billionaire arrogance. Sienna finally let herself cry, holding on to him as the heavy burden of her past lifted. Years later, the halls of the Vale estate were filled with laughter. Adrian's merger was a massive success, but his true pride was his family. Sienna had used his support, his resources, and her own brilliant mind to open a network of specialized schools for deaf children across the country. They stood on the terrace, holding hands, watching Leo play in the gardens. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good story of love and redemption. Subscribe to the channel to follow the next stories. We will see you next time. Sebastian Kane despised the media, but as the flashbulbs illuminated the rainy pavement, he knew he was trapped. The CEO of Kane Enterprises had just survived a violent car crash on a slick downtown intersection. He was pinned, the engine smoking, when a woman shattered the remaining glass with a tire iron and dragged him to safety seconds before the car burst into flames. The paparazzi arrived just in time to capture the ruthless billionaire being held by an off-duty emergency room nurse. The morning papers dubbed her the Angel of Kane Enterprises. Sebastian saw a public relations nightmare that could derail his upcoming initial public offering. He needed to control the narrative. He tracked her down to a crumbling community clinic on the east side of the city. Margot Ellis was scrubbing a stainless steel counter when he walked in, his tailored suit completely out of place among the peeling paint. He slid a blank check across the metal surface, demanding she sign a non-disclosure agreement and play the part of his devoted savior for the cameras. Margot did not even look at the check. She picked it up, folded it in half and handed it back, telling him that her silence was not for sale and his arrogance was suffocating. Sebastian was taken aback. He was used to people bowing to his wealth. Instead, he proposed a different deal, a 6-month fake engagement to satisfy the media frenzy and secure his company's public image. In return, he would fully fund her failing clinic for the next 10 years. Knowing the clinic was weeks away from bankruptcy, Margot reluctantly agreed. The transition into his world was brutal. Margot moved into his sprawling, minimalist mansion, but she absolutely refused to quit her nursing shifts. When Sebastian tried to assign her a personal stylist and dictate her schedule, she defied him openly, arguing that she was a partner in a contract, not a doll to be dressed up. Watching from the shadows of elite society was Clarissa Wade, Sebastian's bitter and calculating ex-fiancée. Clarissa noticed the coldness in Sebastian's eyes and the calluses on Margot's hands, immediately sensing that the fairy tale romance was a manufactured lie. Despite their constant clashes over control and independence, the forced proximity began to alter the atmosphere between them. One evening, a severe thunderstorm rolled through the city, triggering a sudden, silent panic attack in Sebastian, a lingering trauma from the car crash. He hid in his dark study, struggling to breathe. Margot found him. She did not mock him or call for his security team. Instead, she sat on the floor beside him, gently guiding his breathing, showing him a profound, quiet tenderness that broke through his titanium defenses. The turning point came weeks later at the Kane Enterprises Winter Gala. While walking down the grand staircase, Margot suddenly turned pale, gasped for air, and collapsed. The room erupted into chaos. At the hospital, the emergency doctors informed a frantic Sebastian of the truth Margot had kept hidden. She suffered from a severe degenerative heart condition. She had spent her entire life saving others because she knew her own time was dangerously limited, and she had taken his contract to ensure her clinic would survive long after she was gone. Sebastian felt a crushing weight in his chest. His fear of losing her manifested as cold, burning anger. He felt betrayed that she had hidden something so monumental. He hired the best cardiologists in the world, filled her room with the most expensive medical equipment, but he completely withdrew emotionally, using silence and distance as his armor. Margot felt entirely isolated in his massive, quiet house, realizing that the man she was falling in love with only knew how to solve problems with money, not with presence. Sensing the fracture in their relationship, Clarissa Wade made her final move. She bribed a corrupt hospital administrator to leak Margot's private medical files and the financial details of the clinic's funding to a notorious gossip journalist. The next morning, a massive exposé hit the front pages, painting Margot as a manipulative gold digger who was faking the severity of her illness to extort millions from the Kane empire. The board of directors panicked, demanding Sebastian cancel the engagement and cut all ties with Margot to save the company's stock. Instead of retreating, Sebastian orchestrated a masterstroke. He called a live, televised press conference at the Kane Enterprises headquarters, inviting the journalist and Clarissa, who arrived expecting a public breakup. Standing before a sea of cameras, Sebastian did not defend himself. He defended Margot. He projected intercepted emails and financial wire transfers onto the screens behind him, unequivocally proving that Clarissa had paid for the stolen medical records and orchestrated the smear campaign. The room gasped. Investors watching live instantly pulled their backing from Clarissa's ventures. She was publicly humiliated, her social standing destroyed in a matter of minutes, as security escorted her out of the building. Leaving the press conference, Sebastian drove straight back to the mansion. He found Margot packing her modest belongings, believing the contract was finally void. He stopped her, his voice devoid of any corporate command. He apologized for hiding behind his wealth and his pride when she needed him most. He confessed that all his billions meant nothing if he could not hear her heartbeat next to his every night. He asked her to stay, not as a contract, but as his wife. Margot looked at the vulnerability in his eyes and finally let go of her own stubborn pride, stepping into his arms. Months later, the skyline of the city was far behind them, Sebastian had shocked the business world by stepping down as chief executive officer, leaving the company in the hands of a trusted board. They relocated to a quiet, sunlit coastal town where the sea air was good for Margot's health. Together they opened a state-of-the-art seaside clinic, funded by his wealth but run by her compassionate spirit. They sat on the porch of their wooden house, watching the waves, completely free of the toxic world they had left behind. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good story of love and redemption. Subscribe to the channel to follow the next stories. We will see you next time.
Texto narrativo basado no roteiro enviado. Texto colado. Editar. The infographic explains how the three stories follow the same emotional journey even though each couple faces a different crisis. Julian needs a wife to protect his inheritance, Adrian needs one to secure an important merger, and Sebastian needs a believable engagement to control a public scandal. In every case, the relationship begins as a practical agreement built on money, urgency, and image. The men believe wealth can solve everything, while the women accept because they are carrying private burdens that cannot be ignored. This shared structure reveals the first psychological theme: control as protection. Julian, Adrian, and Sebastian avoid vulnerability by turning relationships into contracts. Their wealth lets them control appearances and public narratives, but it cannot protect them from loneliness, fear, or emotional dependence. Clara, Sienna, and Margot challenge that illusion. They refuse to behave like possessions and preserve their dignity even when surrounded by luxury. The hidden truths are central to the conflict. Clara is gathering evidence against the man who destroyed her family. Sienna is trying to save her deaf son and provide medical care and education. Margot is living with a serious heart condition while fighting to keep her community clinic alive. These secrets are not simple manipulation. They are survival strategies shaped by grief, responsibility, and limited social power. Secrecy creates distance, but the stories also explain why each woman felt unable to reveal everything. When the truth appears, pride replaces trust. The men feel betrayed and retreat into silence because they do not know how to process pain. Their coldness becomes another form of control. Yet love is not proven by money or public declarations. It is proven through care. Julian stays beside Clara when she is sick. Adrian quietly pays for Leo's treatment. Sebastian defends Margot when her private medical information is used against her. Their transformation begins when protection stops being possession and becomes responsibility. The social analysis is equally important. The stories contrast elite corporate spaces with the lives of waitresses, cleaners, nurses, patients, and struggling families. This exposes class prejudice and the belief that wealth determines intelligence, dignity, or value. Clara, Sienna, and Margot prove that courage, empathy, education, and competence are not limited to social status. Their work also represents invisible labor. They care for others, heal communities, raise children, and preserve family legacies, yet society often treats this work as less important than corporate power. The antagonists represent greed without ethics. Marcus Sterling, Eleanor Vale, and Clarissa Wade use reputation, legal pressure, private information, and money to control others. Their defeat is not only romantic justice. It rejects systems that reward manipulation and punish vulnerability. The final lesson is that real partnership begins when both people become equals. Contracts create the first connection, but honesty, courage, and mutual care create the lasting relationship. These stories resonate because they combine romantic fantasy with questions about trauma, class, caregiving, power, and redemption. They suggest that love becomes real only when people stop performing roles and allow themselves to be truly known.